Welcome back, students that are taking Math for Business and Finance and Math Applications. We're doing Chapter 6, Percents and Their Applications, and this should actually be Part 2, okay? So go back and watch Part 1, and we picked up where we left off with learning Unit 6-2. I was going to begin explaining this one here, right? Now this is in your book, and you can, like I said, you can probably read through the book and you can comprehend what's going on here, right? But I want to be able to point out a couple of things. I mean, I just randomly picked this. I did not hunt for this particular problem. But let's just go through it here as how I think about things. Okay, so we have Abby Burnett has yet to receive 60% of her lobster order. Abby received 80 lobsters to date. What was her original order? And in the book, it says steps to solving the problem. Okay, we set up the formula. Base is equal to portion divided by the rate. Right. So the question is, what's going to be, the base? Well, the base is the original order, and that kind of makes sense, right? And the portion by the rate. So now we're going to calculate the rate. Well, my portion is 80 lobsters to date, and my rate is 60%. Okay. Now, if you haven't been doing this quite a lot, notice what I just did, and you're wrong, right? Because you're using the numbers that are there, okay? And you're trying to figure out, well, what is my portion? What is my base? And what is my rate? And notice that what it says here that to calculate the base rate, we have the 80 as the portion, but we have 0.4, 40% of the base. Well, where did the 40% come from? It's not in the problem. And remember when we went back to word problems, go back and watch the videos, the theory videos on solving word problems, and I keep on saying that we have information that's directly related to answering what's being asked. We have information that has nothing to do with what's being asked, and we have information that needs to be modified, okay? In this problem here, as we're going along, before I go there, the problem that people have with word problems is they understand, they can identify the directly related material. They can identify something that has nothing that has to do with the problem. But where they trip up most is when they have information that needs to be modified. Because it doesn't look like a direct piece of information, they automatically make the mistake of saying it has nothing to do with the problem and throw it out. And then they end up going wrong and doing the word problem. And in this case here, Abby Burnett has yet to receive 60% of her lobster order. You look at that and go, okay, is that directly related, or is it has nothing to do with the problem, or doesn't need to be modified? And a lot of students would automatically assume that 60% is directly related to solving the problem. Abby received 80 lobsters to date. They can say, okay, that's directly related, and it's asking me for the original order. So, they'll set up their formula as the base is equal to 80 divided by the 60%. And we see that's wrong because this 60% needs to be modified. Abby Burnett has yet to receive 60% of her order. Well, if I have an order here and 60% we have not received, okay, that means 40% we have received. Now notice what I just did. I drew an order, okay, and I labeled part of the information. Well, here's 60%. Now I don't know how much this order is, right? That's because that's what we're trying to figure out, the base, the total amount. But the word base is not intuitive to me to say, oh, well, this is the total that I'm trying to figure out. Base to means something underneath. So as far as a terminology wise, it's not a good term as far as I'm concerned in order to describe what you're doing. It's not very intuitive. But as I sit here and I'm looking at the problem, I'm going, she has yet to receive 60%. A little bit of common logic to me says, okay, well, if I have something, and that's why I drew the circle, and I have not received 60%, that means 40% I have received. And what did I just do? I modified that information to get the 40%. Now, Abby received 80 lobsters. And notice that this 80 lobsters is a hard number. Okay, it's a whole number. But notice that we're talking 60% and 40%. They're percentages. Now, I'm going to go into that in the next slide because there's a relationship between percentages and numbers that you need to understand. You're not looking at whole numbers all the way across the board here. Here you're looking at a percentage, but over here you're looking at how many lobsters. And it's asking you what was the original order, the number of lobsters, right? So you're looking at two numbers, two whole numbers, and you're looking at a percent, right? It's not intuitive, right? Whereas if I'm looking at this right here, and I'm saying, let me change colors here. If I'm looking at this right here, okay, I can, here I'm looking at and saying, oh yeah, I know that this is 40% received, and that 40% is equal to 80 lobsters. And I didn't receive 60%. I don't know how many lobsters that is, but what I do know is 80 lobsters plus whatever that amount is equal to the total number of lobsters that I'm going to get. Okay, so they plug in the numbers into the formula. Now again, we have to go back if I want to if I want to figure out the base. Well, I have to go back to the formula I memorized, or I have to do the math in order to arrive at that formula. Okay, and it's the portion divided by the rate. Okay, so that's what we have here. We have the portion. Get my pen back. We have the portion divided by the rate. So I have 80 is the portion divided by my rate of 40%. 80 lobsters is 40% of the base. And when I do the math, I end up with 200 lobsters. Okay, is the total quote-unquote base. Right? 80 is the portion, 40%. Now remember, that's a percent, and we did this in previous chapters, we have to convert the 40% into a decimal, and the way we do that is because percents are based upon 100, we move the decimal place over 2 places. So 40% is now equal to 0.4 as a decimal, right? And that's why we can do the math now as 80 divided by 0.40 in order to get our base, which then our base is equal to 200. We can't divide a percent into a whole number. We have to keep them both in, they both either have to be decimals or they have to be percents, and we have to make some kind of conversion there, okay? So as you can see, this is not very intuitive to me in trying to use the base rate and portion, and using this portion formula. Again, if that's the way you want to go about it and you want to memorize it, go right ahead. But it's more about understanding a concept and then applying it to that situation using a little common sense and logic. Right. Let me move on to the next slide here and finish up. Okay, now I had said that when it comes to percents, okay, there's really a relationship, and the relationship is between the amount, if that's what you're using, the dollar amount, the quantity, and the percent. Okay, to give you an example, and I'm going to try to keep the numbers easy. Let's say I have 100 widgets, okay, and I'm returning 40 widgets. So that means I have 60 widgets left. Okay, now that could have been $100 less $40, and that means I'd end up with $60 left. Now these are decimal numbers, right? I mean, dollars are, 60.00, $60.00, okay? Or this is a whole number is 60.0 as a whole number, okay, as a quantity, okay? And even if we have, fractions like 5 and 3/4, okay, we can convert the 3/4 into 5.75. You learned how to do that in previous chapters, but basically these are whole numbers. Now, I said there is this relationship between amounts, dollars, quantity, and percents. And the way we think about percents is, 100% is the whole thing. Makes sense, right? Well, when we're talking about whole numbers, the number 1 is a whole number, it's a whole percent. So this 100% equates to the number 1. And if I had 10 or 13 or 75.67, it doesn't matter what the whole number is, right? Because that's 100% of whatever that number is. Okay. So if I think about an item in terms of 100%, okay, then now things become a little bit easier, because if I end up having to divide something up into different portions, and notice I'm using that word portions as part of our portion formula. If I sorry about that. If I divide that 100% up into portions, okay, then I end up with two different things. In other words, think about a pizza pie, and that's where I always like going back to the pizza pie. If I have 4 cuts in the pie and I eat 1 cut, okay, well, that 1 slice that was eaten has a relationship to the other 3 that have not been eaten. I have, and that's where ratios come from, okay? I have 1 portion that was eaten and 3 that weren't. And you could go back to ratios in that respect. But out of this 100%, I can figure out what percentage was used and what percentage wasn't used. Now we're thinking in terms of base, portion, and rate, okay? Because our base would be 100%. So with this kind of thinking in mind, that we have 2 different percentages, but the total of the 2 percentages equal 100%, I could come over here to my math, right, and figure out percentages based upon this, okay? If I had $100 in sales, 100 items or $100, okay? Well, as a percentage, 100, as I said, any number, it's going to be 100% of that number, okay? And if I have, if 40 were returned, well, that's 40%, right? How do I get that? Well, 40 divided by the 100 gives me 40%, right? I end up with a decimal. Okay, let me do the math here, just so everybody can see. I end up with 0.4 when I divide 40 by 100. And to convert a decimal into a percent, I move the decimal place over 2 places and make it a percent, because the percents, we talk in terms of hundredths. So 40 divided by 100 is equal to 40%. All because I just moved the decimal place over 2 places. Mathematically, I would have had 0.4 and then multiply it by 100, and I moved the decimal place, right? 1 place, okay, because I have 1 place here, and that's how I end up with 40 as the percent. That's the math behind it, okay? So over here, I'm going to go to green here. So I have 100% here, because 100 divided by 100 is 1, and you multiply that by 100, and that gives you 100%. 40 ends up being 40%. Well, just subtracting 40% from 100%, that tells me I'm getting 60%. So 40% was returned. Maybe this was the portion that was returned, and this is the portion that we kept. Well, the remainder is the 60%. And of course, I could do the math. The 60 divided by 100, again, ends up being 0.6, and I multiply that by 100 in order to convert it to a percent. I end up with 60%. Okay, but you see the relationship here. We were talking about portion is equal to base times the rate. And what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, I have a base, and I have a portion, and I have a rate over here. I don't like the terms because they're not intuitive. However, the concept and the idea behind it makes sense. I'm just saying that out of the 100%, I have two different amounts. Whether I call which one I call a portion and which one I call a rate, that depends upon the situation. And that's where I said I don't like using the formula, because in the future you're always going to be trying to memorize, and you're going to end up getting yourself confused because you'll have seen so many problems and you won't be sure as to what you're looking at. Okay, and you'll be apt to make mistakes. So for me, I look at things more from a logical, intuitive perspective. Let me erase as much as I'm not going to erase. Let's go here and erase some of this here, and now I'm at 15 minutes or so, 16 minutes, and I don't want to take too much more time here on this video, so, and I'm going to just, there we go. So for me, again, there's this relationship between a whole number and a percent. Okay, one is equal to 100%. 13.57 is equal to 100% when I'm looking at a whole thing. If I said this whole thing was 13.57, well, that means it's 100% of this whole thing. That relationship happens to be 13.57. Okay, and from that, I can divide something into whatever portion I want. And that's where, if I have a whole number of 1, well, what is a fraction? Okay, a fraction is a division of 1. So if I have 1/4, right, which is equal to 0.25 as a decimal, right, that means this portion is 0.25. And that means this portion has to be the other half in order to get to 1 or 100, which is 0.75. And all we need to do is just convert that decimal into a percent by multiplying 0.25 times 100. And since I have two decimal places here, 1, 2, I end up with 25%. So this portion is 25%. And this portion ends up being 75% when I subtract one from the other in order to get 1, right? Or add them together in order to get 1, right? So hopefully you see this relationship between the whole number and a percent. It's not like you're learning something entirely different, okay? But when you're reading a problem, you do have to think about, what it is in totality that you're looking at, what parts you're looking for, and what's being asked. And to me, it's easier to do things from a logical, more common sense perspective than to be trying to memorize formulas and picking the formula in order to fit the situation. So with that said, I'm going to move on and start doing the homework problems, okay? But when I do the homework problems, I'm going to be doing them from a common sense perspective, and where applicable, you'll start to see that to a certain extent I do use the formula, but not in the same fashion. One is not more right than the other, okay? But when you're doing the problems, you're going to be sitting there going, okay, what do I do? Which formula do I use? Well, I'm not going to be presenting the formula. I'm going to be presenting my thought process. And after doing them for a while, you'll start to see that it seems to be, at least to me anyway, it makes things a little bit easier. Okay, so I should have made a third video out of this, but I didn't, and that's just the way it is. All right, so I'll see you in the homework problems. If you have any questions about this, definitely feel free to contact an instructor.